So let's start the second panel, which focuses on less politically controlled, more individually planned, so-called voluntary population movements. The panel is moderated by John Beecham, who is a Polish-British journalist. He worked for Polish radio for over a decade and currently produces podcasts for the Polish press agency. He teaches journalism and has also worked on a number of innovative audio projects in both Polish and English, including geolocated soundwalks for culture.pl. He's one of the founders of Free Range Productions and independent audio storytelling company. And fun fact, you can also hear his voice on the Warsaw subway. So let's listen to him carefully. The floor is yours.
Oh, wow, it's working. Yes, many thanks for that very kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here. Yes, and my voice might sound familiar to those of you who are in Warsaw on a regular basis, as I have, let's say, the infamous... zaszczyt, we say in Polish. I can't even remember how to say that in English anymore. We're supposed to show it. Sorry? Honor, thank you. Thank you. This is great. I'm getting some language tuition as well in my native language. So it's an honor, but unfortunately, if you have a chance to go to Warsaw, do keep your ears peeled, because I'm the person that tells everyone to change trains in certain places. Anyway, my name is John, and it's actually, I wanted to think of some sort of a quippy remark to begin this session with, such as I'm a product of European migration. From the 20th century, but even going back to the 11th century, as my forebears came over with William the Conqueror to the United Kingdom, or to England in the 11th century. And also, I just wanted to throw a kind of comment out there to begin with, because we've been talking about forced migration and voluntary migration. Today we've been talking about that. And I just wanted to kind of quickly throw something out there, which I was talking with Dr. Jawanowski-Stefańczyk earlier, about how my mother emigrated from Poland to the UK in the 1970s. And I'm kind of thinking, well, was it forced migration or was it voluntary migration? She obviously had the agency to leave Poland in the 1970s, but obviously, and so you can't really say that it was forced migration, but at the same time, you know, life would have been slightly harder for her had she stayed in Poland in the 1970s. So I'm just kind of thinking, you know, where does this boundary lie between you know, forced migration and voluntary migration? But enough about me. I'm here simply to moderate this discussion. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to introduce our panelists for today. We have 3 here with us, and we have 2 online. You can see behind me. Yes, a wave there. Thank you. So first up, I just want to kind of give you an idea of how we will be dealing with this panel today. So first of all, I will give a brief introduction to the speakers, and then I would ask each speaker, after I introduce them, to say hello and then give their 5-minute presentation, which I asked them to prepare a few days ago. So let's begin. We have some time in front of us. First of all, I would like to introduce Professor Maciej Duszczyk, who is with us online. He is a researcher at the Center for Migration Research in the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Warsaw. He is chairman of the Council of the University of Gdańsk in the term 2021-2024. He is also vice rector for research at the University of Warsaw from 2016 to 2020, and earlier he was deputy director of the Analysis Department of the Office of the Committee for European Integration. Between 2014 and 2016, and then from 2020 to 2021, he was a member of the Scientific Policy Committee, which he also chaired. Between 2008 and 2011, he was a member of the team of strategic advisors to Prime Minister Donald Tusk, and between 2012 and 2014, chair of the team for the development of Polish migration policy in the Chancellery of the President of the Republic of Poland. Between 2014 and 2015, a visiting professor at the Martin Luther University in Halle-Wittenberg and the Friedrich Schiller University in Jena, head of the grants funded, among others, by the National Science Center and the Polish-German Foundation for Science. A scholarship holder of the Jean Monnet Project and the Karl Duisberg Gesellschaft and the Committee for Scientific Research. It is an honor to have you here, and such an academic heavyweight as well. So, Professor Dustrik, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this very kind invitation, and I'm really sorry that I could have been present in Bremerhaven. But after cancellation of pre-flights, it was impossible to come to Bremerhaven. And that's why I welcome from Warsaw. And tomorrow, when I will travel by metro, by subway, I will really listen to the voice from the metro. Okay, I have only, as you said, I have only 5 minutes, and please. Let me focus mainly on Poland, because Poland, as you probably know, is the country which shifted its status from typical emigration country into immigration one. You mentioned that I was employed in the Office of the Committee for European Integration. It is the Ministry of European Affairs in the past, but we don't have now such ministry. But before the negotiation, just after the negotiation, our membership with the European Union, we had such ministry. And of course, in that time, we focused mainly on immigration. But that now, of course, immigration, also the economic immigration, labor migration, is very important for us. But as you know, the 20th century has been called the age of migration by one of the most eminent researchers of migration processes, Stephen Castles. Of course, 2 world wars contributed to it, but also the unprecedented economically motivated migration of the early 1960s and 1970s. Poland practically throughout the 20th century was an emigration country on the map of either European or world migration. On the top of that, between 1946 and 1953, it was a country which was practically closed. A friend of mine, a historian dealing with migration, Dariusz Stola, describes Poland at the time as the country without an exit. Virtually every Pole has had a migration experience, if only through the incident employment of himself, as myself, for example, or relatives when abroad. This also applies to me, as I said. Back in 1988, I was still planning to emigrate permanently from Poland. My plans were changed by Poland regaining its sovereignty. Eventually, I ended up picking strawberries in Sweden in the early 90s, but also working at several universities already as migration researchers in the 21st century. A decisive change in the perception of Poland, the migration map of the world, was brought about by the 21st century. On the one hand, Poland's accession to the EU generated a huge wave of economic migration. On the other hand, however, since the beginning of the second decade of the 21st century, Poland has begun to transform itself into a country that is very attractive to immigrants, especially from Eastern Europe, but not only. It now has all the typical characteristics of an immigration state. As I can say in proof, we are now typical immigration country. Of course, Russia's aggression against Ukraine has contributed to this. First in 2014 and full-scale aggression in 2022. However, it should not be forgotten that Poland has practically since 2010 had one of the most liberal selective policies to encourage foreigners to take up employment in the labor market. This applies mainly to Ukrainians, Belarusians, Georgians, Moldovans, and Armenians. Currently, there are approximately 3 million foreigners living in Poland. More than 2 million of them are employed. This is a very high figure. It also includes war refugees from Ukraine. But what is absolutely necessary, before 24 February 2022, we had in Poland 1.3 million Ukrainians, mainly economic migrants from Ukraine, 1.3 million. That's why at now we have little bit more than 2 million Ukrainians, but this number is divided into two parts. Who were refugees, it is 1 million, and people who came to Poland before 24th of February, it is another million. Special regulation targeting who were refugees in the context of the discussion, in the context of the discussion on the specifics of migration in Poland, I would like to draw attention to two phenomena. Although they do not apply only to Poland, but rather to the entire EU. Special regulation targeting war refugees from Ukraine have been adopted, temporary protection directive. The reasons for such a decision are obvious. But at the same time, we have forgotten about the Belarusians in this context. Therefore, it is now possible for Ukrainian to go back to Ukraine for a while and visit her or his family or friends, and they return to the place of residence. For example, Poland, Germany, or other countries. This is also great hope that many of the Ukrainians will return to their country. This situation is completely different for Belarusians. If they or their relatives took part in the pro-democratic elections, demonstration concerning elections, then they cannot return to Belarus, even for a short time. If they do, they will most likely be arrested. So paradoxically, the situation of Belarusians in the EU is currently worse than the Ukrainians. It is important to realize this. Secondly, and it is I finish in 1 minute. Secondly, several European countries, including Poland, as I have already mentioned, have turned into an immigration country. But there is still a time of immigration in living memory. One would expect that this collective experience or collective memory would influence the perception of foreigners seeking a better life in our countries. Well, it turns out that this is not the case. We have quickly forgotten that we ourselves were emigrants. Even in the case of their very positive attitudes towards the influx of Ukrainians to Poland, this was mainly determined more by the awareness of having a common enemy, such as aggressive Russia, rather than by our own emigration experience and the search for a peaceful place to live. Surely this phenomenon needs a better explanation. Maybe I stop now, and then of course I will come back to the exchange our views and sharing our views and of course discussion with audience. Thank you very much.
Properly. Is that okay? Is that pronunciation good? Okay. We're just going to carry on then. Professor Schick is a research professor at the Institute for Sociology and Professor Emeritus at the ELTE University in Budapest. His major research fields are migration, informal economy, network capital, and xenophobia. Since 2005, he is a member of IMISCO, and in Hungary he is a member of various research committees and was the president of the Hungarian Sociological Association. In the past 10 years, he was the head of research of several EU projects, such as Concordia Discourse, EU-board regions, the EU 7th Framework, that's the STYLE project, CISFAL, and the Bridges, Horizon 2020. I'd like to introduce you, and the floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure not to be there because I have a very bad headache. Sorry, so I better not to destroy your your feelings. I'll be brief because we agreed that you already introduced me quite well. I just tell you some details about the two ongoing projects I'm involved with. The first one is Unlikely Refuge, which is research run by the Masaryk Institute in the Czech Republic. And this is the emergence of the refugee regime in Hungary, the transformation of the system in, let's say, in the 1990s. Extremely interesting story because the Hungarian refugee system emerged from the blue. No one knew how to handle with refugees who appeared mostly from Romania, quite unexpectedly. And it was still at the beginning of this process, communism in Hungary or socialism in Hungary. So it was really a politically enthusiastic and completely unorganized situation when the first refugee regime emerged. When I wrote articles about this era, I gave the title of one of my papers that the era of innocence, because we were innocent. We didn't know anything about refugee regimes and law and financial issues. We just had to go from one day to the next day and solve the problem. So right now, under this project, we gather together all the existing materials. We make interviews with those who at that time were in power and who actually designed the system and try to understand what we did 30 years ago. No one can ask for a better thing for a scholar. The second research I'm involved in is Horizon 2020 research. The acronym is Bridges. And this is about the production of narratives and the circulation of narratives, migration discourse related narratives all over, well, in 6 European countries. As far as Hungary is concerned, my position is extremely easy because all I have to do is to understand the Orban regime, and I use the two interrelated theories. One is informational autocracy, because I consider that Hungary is now an autocracy, and I use this informational autocracy theory because it fits very well to describe how narrative production, migration-related narrative production actually occur. On the other hand, I developed 7 years ago when the refugee crisis, so-called refugee crisis, was at its peak in 2015. I tried just to understand how the propaganda ministry of the Hungarian government at that time handled this issue. So I developed the theory of moral panic button, which is a special organization which creates the narratives for political purposes, to create fear, to create crisis, because that's the way how they can keep popularity and power intact. So since then, I already enumerated about 20 presses of this moral panic button, and all I do, I just describe these processes and try to generalize it. And warn all other countries who have the tendency to play around with the idea to have another type of autocracy, including Poland, but you seem to survive quite well, but also Italy and Israel, that this is an extremely dangerous extremely dangerous game to play. Thank you.
Yeah, and the role of the media quite a lot during today's panel. Coming back to Bremerhaven now, and I would like to introduce our next speaker. It's Professor Isa Guvelli. Hopefully I pronounced that properly. Professor Guvelli works in the Department of Sociology at the University of Warwick, researching inequality, migration, religion, and family. She has led international research projects such as the 2000 Families, which is published in she has published a book on intergenerational consequences on migration, socioeconomic, family, and cultural patterns of stability and change in Turkey and Europe. She received the ERC Consolidator Award to study the grandchildren of the pioneer labor migrants in Europe. And Isa is also an expert for the European Commission's Gender Equality Unit. It's lovely to have you here, and the floor is yours. I think we have to wait for the sound guys to turn it on. I don't think I had to press anything. Let's see if yours works.
I'm loud in talking. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. It's really, really very interesting meeting with different specializations, and listening to people was, I mean, in the previous round. Thank you very much. And actually should say that I did not know about this museum, and I have had a walk around. And so, and read that 7.2 million immigrants left from Germany, from this port. And now we are talking about the benefits and of migration, which is migrants are seeing as a threat these days on different political spectrum, left, right, though they are seen as a threat. But on the other side, from your back, the politicians, they are allowing migrants to come in. Why is that? They need to, because we need migrants, right? Migrants move to improve their lives, and destination countries, I'm talking about like economic migrants, they need migrants to fill the gaps. We know in the UK, the NHS, and this is the health system. We have huge gaps in NHS. It's like long waiting list for me, for example, to get my daughter's ears tested. I had to wait for 1.5 years. So this, but I wanted to put this in perspective, seeing this museum and our history to search for prosperity, and that is the underlying mechanism in migration. So we need to see migration in that perspective. There are gains to it, and there are also damages for mostly migrants themselves as well. My research, I am a research mainly interested, my research mainly is about social inequalities. And they mostly say it's not research, but me search. So you are after your history as well. I'm a second generation in a Turkish family from the Netherlands. So after my PhD, which was about new social classes, we were in gatherings in our family. We were mostly talking about, especially my mom used to ask, like, how would our lives be if we were to stay in Turkey? And so I was doing research on social class, but then I was also interested to know about that, about the answer. And reading about it, I discovered that in fact there was not research on that, especially in Europe. So I thought, let's find out then. And I developed the 2000 families research. Can you bring the picture about, yes, this one. So I went to Turkey with it was a huge budget, 2.5 million euros. I went to Turkey, to 5 regions there, screened the regions, found those guest workers who left for 10 European countries, as you see here. These are the main still main destination countries in Europe. And we screened those 5 regions and found those who went for the first time as guest workers. And then from the same regions, from the same age group, we also selected randomly those who could have gone to Europe but did not go, who stayed there. And then we found them, we found their children, and we found their grandchildren all over Europe, and even in US and Canada, interviewed them and found their lifestyles and outcomes, compared those who left to those who stayed in Turkey. So the question, can you take, okay, yeah. So we obtained so many conclusions and findings, but because I've been asked to reflect on memory and how migration is impacting on generations and how their links are to origin country, I can show you from the data, these are only those who stayed in Europe. You see that the third generation, or let's start from the first generation, the guest workers here, the grandfathers, we asked them, where do you want to be buried when you die? And you see that 100% of them wanted to go to Turkey. And then in the second generation, that percentage was dropped to 97, but still, as you see, very, very high. And then in third generation, it was 95%, very, very high. I must say, the third generation was very young, was not really thinking about dying, but still, I mean, they did not really consider that, I think, oh, where do I want? But they did answer that they wanted to go. But if you do the other one, we also asked them whether they vote for Turkish elections. As you see, the guest workers, the grandfathers, like 75% vote in Turkish elections. That drastically drops in the second generation to, can you read that? 25%. And in the third generation, the grandchildren, they, you see, they only vote, only 8% vote in the Turkish. They could vote, but only 8% do so. So we see, what I would like to say is you see 2 pictures here, yeah? It's not straight that they are so much, they are so much close to Turkey and only involved, because this is the discussion, right? Like 95% of Turkey origin people are Muslim, that they are not integrating. But it's not one picture, one line. It's complex, and this is what I like to emphasize, is that migration has had benefits for migrant families. So that was what I wanted to learn. Being second generation, I am somebody here. This is, you see here, for example, and the highest benefits is for women. You see here those non-migrants. 21% of women who stayed in those regions are in paid employment. This decreases to 33% when they move within Turkey. So migration increased their likelihood to be in paid employment. And those who moved with their parents to Europe, 42% of them are in paid employment. And if they were born in European countries, 63% are in paid employment. So you see that migration increases the likelihood of women earning their own money. What I would like to emphasize is if you go, I would like to ask you all, do you know these people? Yeah? Who doesn't? Okay, not many. So these are the first, the one couple, Turkish origin, second generation Germans who developed the vaccine, right? The first COVID vaccine. So these are, you see, the benefits for themselves, for the society. But I would also like to say it's not only benefits, it's also like they also face discrimination, exclusion. Mental health is very poor among these families. So what I then will stay here, leave it to continue. We need to look at migration as something that benefits us, migrant families, societies, but it also comes with a cost. I'll leave here.
Okay, thanks for the microphone, and thank you very much for that interesting introduction. It's interesting, I know this is not actually part of this discussion, but it might be, maybe you can tell me otherwise, how countries decide on whether its citizens can vote even though they don't live in that country anymore. I personally lost my right to vote in the United Kingdom many years ago now, even though I would like to, and I'm still a British citizen. And on the flip side, I hear of people in the United States, my Polish family, for instance, who barely speak Polish, but they are allowed to vote in Polish elections. So it's an interesting kind of maybe topic to tackle. I wonder whether that'll have any, well, we'll see later on. Moving swiftly on, because time is really moving fast, I would like to introduce now Dr. Cecilia Bruzelius, and I hope I pronounced that right. She is the Junior Professor of European Public Policy at the University of Tübingen, and her research focuses on the social dimension of free movement and EU citizenship. She is a member of FUS, Freedom of Movement and Social Policy in Historical and International Comparison Project, an interdisciplinary research group funded by the German Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs. The ambition of the FUS project is to historicize and compare political and policy processes tied to internal movement and social rights in the EU with those that have taken place in other federations. I would like to thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I should say, because I'm indebted to my employer for paying my salary and so on. So as of today, I'm actually not working in Tübingen anymore.
Okay, because you came from Copenhagen, right? So okay.
So it's literally my first day of employment in Copenhagen at the University of Copenhagen, and I bummed off back to Germany the first thing I did. Anyways, so freedom of movement in Europe has been my focus, and I'm a political scientist, so I'm going to talk more about, or my interests are more in laws and the regulations and how they're made. And I'm not your first person to speak about memories, perhaps, but I am interested in very much so in how states try to regulate the mobility and movement of citizens and non-citizens within free movement spaces and beyond them. Yeah? And of course that shapes migration and then shapes memories, I suppose. And one thing I was, because we were given, we could say just about anything we'd like to today. And one thing I've been working on recently are the similarities and differences between politics of migration, immigration and emigration. And one thing that kind of keeps coming back to me that maybe is a little bit banal to mention, but nevertheless interesting to me is this dialectic between the good and the bad emigrant, whereby the one who is a bad immigrant is often a good immigrant. Think of doctors and the notion of brain drain. And the good immigrant is often the bad immigrant. So countries have historically and today been quite happy to see unemployed or poor citizens leave to find something more valuable to do or find a job for themselves in another country. And the same countries receiving, or the countries receiving them on the other hand, have then often perceive this sort of immigration as scroungers or people are going to come and use the social system. Of course, that's not a truth that holds everywhere. It changes according to sort of economic and demographic conditions. But what's interesting to me about this is like what it tells us about the relationship sort of state-citizen and the differences or similarities between citizens and migrants in this way that there's a British sociologist in Oxford, her name is Bridget Anderson. She speaks of communities of values in this way that it's not just this nation states that were mentioned before, the nation containers, but it's actually, that it's not just the border, the national border that draws who is us and who's them, but it's also other definitions of value. So for example, capitalism, who is a good worker, who's not, and how that sometimes the good, the bad citizen and the bad immigrant are sort of on the same end of the spectrum as the good immigrant and the good citizen. Yeah, and just another thing that I wanted to mention in terms of inequalities, coming back to what you were just mentioning and what you said initially about your mother. And yeah, the question of what's voluntary and not, because I think most migration researchers would start by raising their eyebrows when they hear sort of voluntary versus forced. Can we really make this distinction? What drives intra-EU migration, the largest part are inequalities. So people move for job opportunities, most of all. But also to some extent, it's not just job opportunities, but it's the employment package. So what is the social security? What are the conditions of work? This is the main driver, and that's also why we see after 2004, with the Eastern enlargement, that migration in Europe picks up to a much larger extent than previously. And as you were saying, people move for reasons, for opportunities. Yeah? So the people who left the harbor here more than 100 years ago, they were looking for better opportunities in America, and today other people are coming to Europe for the same reason. So migration is a kind of leveler in that it can change, improve people's lives. And one thing that interests me a lot is how the institutions that mitigate inequality, so I'm thinking of welfare states, labor market institutions and so on, how they shape migration and are shaped by migration. And today we're used to hearing like debates about the dangers of the welfare state on the one hand, of people coming and abusing the system. At the same time, we need all those, or some of those people, the good immigrants, right? The ones who are going to fill that void that we're facing on the labor market as the baby boomers retire and so on. But one thing that's much less talked about and that I've been working on recently, I just wanted to bring in here, is the role of emigration as a potential driver of change, welfare state change in those countries from where people are leaving. So historically, as people are leaving, for example, from this harbor, one of the reasons given for why the first basic pension, the first social insurance in Sweden was introduced, the great Swedish welfare state, maybe not so great anymore, but was to retain people. So they actually was this idea that by introducing this scheme, we will have more people stay in the country. And actually, looking at discourses around immigration in some of Eastern European countries and Southern European countries today and in the last decades, you see very similar arguments that actually we need to up our game if we're gonna have people stay here or come back. And that's interesting to me, also thinking ahead of the future of migration, because free movement, I mean, we see like wages increase, but there's still a large divergence in terms of when we look at things like social insurances, social services, the ability for women to work and have children at the same time across European countries. And I think that will have to change for migration within Europe to sort of slow down. It's not just a question of job opportunities and wages, but also of the kind of the life package, if you will. So yeah, I think I'll end there.
Many thanks. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Perfect. Many thanks for that introduction. Some extremely interesting points coming up there. So I know we're going to have a great discussion in just a moment. But before we get on to that discussion, we have one more person to introduce here. And it is, are you a professor, a doctor? Professor, okay, perfect. So Professor Jussi Laine is a professor of multidisciplinary border studies at the Karelian Institute at the University of Eastern Finland, holding the title of docent, or docent, does that work? Okay. Of human geography, so my Finnish is a bit rusty, or I Finnish academic titles. He is the president of the World Social Science Association and currently serves on the steering committee of the International Geographical Union's Commission on Political Geography. Between 2013 and 2021, he led the Association for Borderland Studies, the leading international scholarly association dedicated exclusively to the systematic interchange of ideas and information relating to international border areas. It's great to have such a specialist here among us. Professor Laine is a human geographer, yet in his approach to borders, he combines influences from international relations and geopolitics, political sociology, history, anthropology, and psychology. Within border studies, he seeks to explore the multi-scalar production of borders and bring a critical perspective to bear on the relationship between state, territory, citizenship, and identity construction. And most recently, Dr. Laine has published works on border mobility, migration, the ethics of borders, and ontological brackets in security. So the floor is yours, Professor, and many thanks once again for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here after this long migration from Hamburg airport, which took me close to 5 hours. So I'm really, really pleased to be here. I was already about to turn around and go back home, but I didn't.
Return migration already?
Exactly. I had enough. Jokes aside. Good to be here. I was listening to these really fascinating talks here, and I completely forgot that I'm supposed to say something clever after all these insights. But let me try. I'm not a historian. I'm not really a migration scholar either. I study borders, as you kindly introduced. Borders as a way, borders as looking glasses to various phenomena, and that's where migration kicks in. When it comes to history, my recent history goes all the way back to last week, maybe 10 days ago, when things started to get a little bit iffy at the Finnish-Russian border. That's what I've been talking about day and night, if I look tired, for the last 10 days or so. And maybe I'll later this evening say something about that, because I find it really fascinating, also regarding the theme of the day today. But as you kindly introduced, my work has really been to try to provide a critical angle on these concepts of borders, territory, identity. Basically challenging the idea, who is a migrant? That's, to put it really black and white matter. That's what I study. Because that concept, of course, is very state-centric. You know, when you move from one country to another, you become a migrant. You know, you live in Flensburg and you move to what's north, Sonderburg, right? You are a migrant. If you live in St. Petersburg and you move to Vladivostok, you are not a migrant. And our statistics that we often show are quite biased in that sense, that mobility, international mobility, to me is a lot more interesting than migration per se, as it is defined these days. And in this conundrum, borders play a very significant role. Of course, you know, these nation-state containers that were already mentioned, and certainly they are much more than that. But when it comes to statistics, that's basically what they do. They define who we are, where we belong, and our understanding of not just migration but societies where we live in at the moment. It completely ignores not completely, but it largely ignores the history before the Westphalian Revolution. Right? Our belongingness today is by and large attached to a state. You know, I come from Finland and I'm now here in Germany. It's very common speech, and I do that personally myself. But how were these boxes colored with different crayons in the political maps of Europe or world, for that matter, actually created? And I think Finland provides a rather interesting case in point, because we are a very young nation, right? You look at the historical maps of Europe, you don't see Finland. Usually, not even physically, it's cut out from that point. And it shows maybe Helsinki you can see on the map, and you don't see the rest of the country. But of course, for the most of history, we were part of Sweden, right? Until 1809, and then Finland lost the eastern province of Finland to even more than that, to Russia, Russian Empire at that time. And you know, how Finnishness was defined meant a very different thing back then. But only until after 1809, when we actually became part of the Russian Empire, even though a very autonomous Grand Duchy under the Russian Empire, that was the very first time that Finland actually formed a political unit of its own. And you know, the first customs border against Russia was created. And then, of course, in long story short, independence 1917, and I'm not going to go through the whole history here, but the border really became a marker of identity. This thing called Finland, which didn't used to exist, had to be created, it had to be manufactured one way or another. And how that was done was really in relation to our neighbors. You know, we are not what Swedes are, we are not what Russians are, who we are Finns. And hence, the impact and the role, the very symbolic role of the borders became very meaningful. Not because there's some kind of a political line or cut in the forest, that didn't really play a role, but our identities were attached to these borders and the very differences that the border symbolizes. And towards Sweden, of course, it was an easier relationship, but with Russia, it was a bit more challenging. But the case in point here that I'm trying to make is that borders, in the end, they are very arbitrary constructions. There's nothing natural about them. In our case, you know, a couple of politicians drew it, went a little bit back and forth for years, and then they decided where it was. There were some wars as well. I'm not going to go into details. But the thing is that for someone who was born in the eastern part of Finland, right, such as myself at the moment, let's talk about myself for a moment. So I'm here. I got a kind invitation from you, coming from Finland. I have a Finnish passport, which today, in this moment, is the second most powerful passport in the world, after United Arab Emirates, based on how many countries you can access without any kind of visa or restrictions. Finland and Sweden are tying the second position at the moment. Had I been born a couple of kilometers to the east, where I was born, and correct me if I'm wrong, but according to my understanding, where one happens to be born is an arbitrary fact. I didn't get to choose where I was born. I was born in this piece of land that was then called Finland. Had I been born a little bit to the east, on this eastern side of this arbitrary line that a couple of politicians drew, I would have a Russian passport at this moment. I would speak Russian. Most likely you would have not invited me to this talk today. So borders have really meaningful and long-term impact on not just one's mobility, but chances in life. What can we do with our lives? They are markers of belonging. We have this idea etched somewhere very deep into our minds that people belong to a certain territorially bounded place and should, in some cases, stay there. And this is very much in the political agenda in Finland. I'm trying to wrap it up very briefly, where today we closed for the first time in history the whole border with Russia, because the Russian state is apparently using third country migrants to create a bit of a hybrid pressure at the Finnish border. But are we really talking about the migrants here? No, we are not really. The government is saying that, and it's not easy, by the way, to close the border. There are some legal implications to that. We've been going back and forth with that. We have some international commitments, we have human rights commitments, we have various things. So to close the border is not something that you do very easily. You have to have very profound reasons, justifications for that in order to do that. Basically deviate from your international commitments and prevent people also leaving one's country, not just coming in. And it's really interesting to think about what are we really talking about here. Yesterday, because the border was closed yesterday, the number of migrants at the border yesterday was 0. 2 days ago it was 2. 3 days ago it was 3. So this is the threat. We had 3 guys at the border. The problem was that they were the wrong kind of people. And of course that somebody else was pushing them to them, some unwillingly. Our discussion now is, who are these people? They can't be legitimate migrants because they have too nice clothing. We decide whether or not they are legitimate refugees based on how expensive jacket they are wearing before they enter the asylum process, for example. I think my time is up. But migration has become a very politicized topic, to the point that just a couple of days ago, our government made actually a political intervention to the Academy of Finland, the Research Council of Finland, and rejected the proposal to fund migration research under the Strategic Research Council, on the grounds that so far most of the research has highlighted the benefits of migration rather than focusing on the challenges of migration. So that research is not funded anymore at this moment. Of course, things can change, but I found that that was quite a bold move from the government. That was a completely different talk that I had written, by the way, but I made my notes here during the talk. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, and yeah, extremely interesting once again. Well, we are running slightly late. We're almost halfway through. I mean, I wanted to start with, let's say, talking about the foundations of migration in Europe leading into the 21st century. Since our time is waning, I will briefly ask a question to our panelists, and that is how, as you're talking about borders, and how a new border, how an invisible border was created after the Second World War, and that is the Iron Curtain. And before we get on to, let's say, what happens well further on down the line after World War II, I would like to ask maybe you, Professor Leiner, about the approaches to migration, or the approaches between West and East following the Second World War, where you have two blocks and two very different views on migration and, let's say, being allowed to cross borders or not.
Thank you so much. I feel like I'm talking too much, but this is a...
Don't worry, we'll get on to other panelists in a moment.
Feel free to, you know, shut me up. Certainly, and I take the liberty to focus on the border that I know in this case,
Sure.
which very much was a Cold War Iron Curtain border. A very simple bilateral interstate border that gained these various other roles since the Second World War, when two very drastic wars were fought between Finland and the Soviet Union, after which the border became basically closed completely from common people, right? And during that era, the two sides developed in quite drastically different directions. So the border became a very much symbol of different ideologies, different economic systems, different religions, and well, different languages, of course, and you could keep going and going. So there was very little migration in that extent, or that sense, until the actual collapse of the Soviet Union, when the border, officially at least, started to open. In the minds of the people, it took a while, because again, as I mentioned already, it really became as a marker of identity. But a very strong conscious process was made to try to change the historical perception of the border as a barrier, where the enemy lies on the other side, into an asset. Because without Russia, Finland was basically an island when you looked from this direction, right? Very difficult to reach. And common people started to interact and change that whole situation. And those Finnish nations who were related to ethnic Finns, Karelians, Vepsians, for example, on the other side, quite high number moved from Russian side to Finland. And this was very popular, given that Finland had also applied the European Union membership 2 weeks, by the way, after the Soviet Union collapsed. And the interactions became really, until 2013, really flourishing. Migration was slow, but the daily interactions really eroded this Cold War era meaning of the border.
We could even see this in Russian popular culture in the 1990s, with a number of films portraying Russians going over to Finland
Sure.
to go fishing, right?
Fishing, for example, and a lot of mixed marriages. That's an interesting form of migration. Usually a Finnish a man and a Russian lady, but a very common practical way of eroding the border, and very prevalent today when the border is closed. Now, of course, we think about the politics, and you may easily say that the right thing to do, close the border, but when you go actually on the ground, where people live by the border and both sides of the border, things get surprisingly tricky when the border is completely closed. We have families whose parents live on the Russian side and their kids go to school in Finland, or we have married couples who have 2 houses on the other side, and so on. And this kind of situation, that border would actually completely close, was completely unheard of until 2 weeks ago. And this is more about borders than migration, but I just find this absolutely fascinating. maybe not in a positive sense, but absolutely fascinating what is happening right this moment at the border.
Thank you very much for that. We're going to stay in the 20th century just for a moment. And I would like to ask you about Turkish migration to the United Kingdom. This is such a, it's a completely new topic for me, because something in the United Kingdom, we're so used to these old kind of colonial migrations, such as the Windrush generation, and in the 1950s and 60s, of people coming from what was then the British Caribbean to the United Kingdom, and we very rarely hear of Turkish migrants to the UK. Obviously, Turkish guest workers in Germany. This is a topic which is well known. But to England, what would have been the motivation to go actually to the United Kingdom in those days? And are there now returns, or what is the case here?
Yeah, so Turkish migration is one of the guest worker migration. It started with the guest worker migration between 1960 and 74. All migrants were official and regular migrants, and borders were open. It was even Western European countries recruiting, going there, having job offices in Turkey, and recruiting labor force. Turkish migration was the same, as you said, is the same logic. They were filling the labor shortages after the Second World War in all Western European countries. So in the UK, you had the Indians, Chinese, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and Caribbeans. Those were official, regular migrants filling those gaps. And in France, you had Algerians, Moroccans, and that was after Italian, Spanish, and Greek came to more northern, affluent countries who went back, actually. So your specific question about Turks moving to United Kingdom, their numbers are 500,000 or so, and they were not in this program. They are mostly refugees, student migrants, first going and then staying there, and then family formation and unification, I would say. It is as that. Return migration among Turks, it's very much, as I said, this guest worker program that was between 1960 and 74. It was very easy migration, right? It's people were coming and then working in a factory. They were their boss were saying, "Oh, we need somebody to work in this job. Do you have a relative?" "Oh, yeah, I have my uncle or my cousin." That was even that easy. And then after 1974, all European countries closed their doors for that sort of migration. And then you saw, and in that period, about 1 million labor migrants came. But those were going back, like working for a year, 2 years, and then going back, and then coming back again and going back again. Once the borders were closed, you saw a surge of migrants who stayed in Europe, in the country they were living, working, and then even brought their families with them, because borders were closed, they could not go, and once they went, they couldn't come back again. So what they did, they stayed, and they brought their families with them. And that made their numbers, like now only Turkish origin people living in Europe, that they are well over 5 million. So those intended consequences of a policy like closing the borders make, like this happened also in the UK, right, after Brexit. This is the discussion we are having in the UK. So it was actually against those Polish people, Romanians coming and stealing the jobs. So we had Brexit, and then we had a surge of migrants coming from other countries. So policies intend to do something, but the unintended intended consequences sometimes bringing very much the opposite what you are, because those policies were not really fit the purpose, I would say.
Thank you for that answer. We'll get on to the subject of Poles and again EU enlargement and how that affected Europe-wide migration later on. I actually wanted to, let's say, ask our two professors who are joining us online to maybe get a kind of Eastern perspective. After the Second World War, I mean, do we actually have any official numbers on migration? Does migration as a topic even exist within the Soviet bloc? Professor Duštik, if I may start with you. Following the Second World War, do we see in any official documents any official migration or voluntary migration within the Soviet bloc or Warsaw Pact countries, or however you'd like to call it?
No, we don't have official statistics between.
Oh no, we can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Okay. We don't have official statistics between before 1989. Of course, it is the. I have already mentioned the Dariusz Stola, and he published a book. This Poland as the country without an exit, and we can find different estimations how many Poles decided to emigrate between 1953 and 1989. I can say this number, we can estimate about these 6 to 7 million of people who in that time decided to emigrate. This is the more than 2 million after 1981. But to be honest, the largest emigration, economically immigration, we had between 2004 and 2007. It is a very short period of time, but a lot of people decided to move, for example, to UK, because UK decided to open the labor market. This is the same the case of Ireland. But for example, also Sweden, the Scandinavian country, with this very nice, in that time, social beneficial system, opened the labor market. But only few people decided to go to Sweden because a lot of people try to find a job, not the social benefits. That's why it was much more easier for them to go to UK or to Ireland, because the job were there. That's why it was the typical economically push factor from Poland, pull factor from UK or Ireland. And but what is absolutely necessary to say, I think, so if we speak on voluntary migration, especially economic migration, it is the remittances. Because during your exchange or your views, it was also the question about the benefits for country of origin. And for example, for us, for Poland, the remittances were absolutely crucial, especially in the 90s, in the early 90s, with this transformed economy. but also between 2004 and 2007, because remittances were larger, were bigger than official transfer from the European budget. That's why, to be honest, these remittances which have gone directly to the households. It was the first benefit of our membership in the European Union, because the free movement, because it was also very important that after 2004, it was possible to legally be employed in UK, Ireland, and Sweden, not other countries, because we had the transition period. But still, the first visible benefit, it was the remittances from the Polish emigrants who transferred their money to Poland to support households, but directly, but indirectly, of course, the Polish economy. That's why it was absolutely important, absolutely crucial. But what is also, I think, so quite important, that's why, because we had in the referendum in 2002, and it was the huge discussion, because I was responsible in that time to prepare, I can say, different types of written benefits, how we could benefit from the opening the labor markets. But I was really afraid, because I was sure that it would be the huge emigration, because UK decided to open the labor market, also the Ireland. But it was the question if we need these people also in Poland, because it was also something like what we can call brain drain. That's why it was the mix of different arguments, but without showing that the Poles would be possible for Poles to emigrate to other European Union countries, to be employed in that countries. It was absolutely crucial. I think without such argument, a lot of people would decide against our membership with the European Union. That's why it was the one of absolutely crucial point in our negotiations, this economic, the possibility of an economic migration within the European Union. Of course, we have already forgotten about the transition period, but still we have to think that how important the transition period was in that time. And the last sentence, as the person who in that time was responsible for such chapter, free movement of persons, I didn't push Germany to open the labor market. The 7 years transition period for us, it was quite a good idea, because we were really afraid that if Germany would open labor market, it would be for us very, very difficult to stop the people, because in that time you had 20% unemployment rate. That's why it was the mix of different arguments, but these arguments were connected with labor migration. Maybe I will stop now. I don't know if I respond to your question, but I tried.
It sounds absolutely great, and everyone seems to be adding their own little personal anecdotes, so I'll actually add mine by saying that I migrated from the UK to Poland a month after it joined the European Union, and everyone was looking at me and kind of scratching their head saying, well, hold on, we're all going to England, why are you coming here? But then again, that is what the European Union is all about free borders and free movements, so of course I was able to go to Poland.
But may I one, sorry, because I forgot one very important issue.
Sure.
Maybe this is 2 sentences, because we have to also take into account that concerning free movement of workers, we have already done a few steps back, because it was the question about the Brexit. Opening the labor market by UK for Poles, for Romanians, Bulgarians, other citizens, it was one of the arguments for Brexit. That's why during the negotiations before the Brexit, we decided we decided in that time to did a few steps back. For example, if we take into account coordination of the social security systems regarding free movement of workers. That's why we have I think so. This is also quite important in our discussion to take into account that even if we have the open labor markets, but now we have some exceptions of this free movement of workers, because a lot of countries were afraid in the time what would be the consequence of the opening the labor markets? Thank you.
Professor Schick, I'd like to ask your experience and Hungary's experience with migration, and especially that Hungary has always had very close relations with its neighboring countries, no matter which border had to be drawn on the map at the time. What is the perception of of this kind of migration from that period, from post-war?
How much time do I have?
Okay.
In an hour, I can give you a very short
Oh, in an
overview
hour.
of this
Okay. Well,
issue.
we still have around 40 minutes.
Okay,
I'd like to
then
ask,
just very briefly.
but very briefly, please.
Years ago, when for a very short time I was a border sociologist with UC together at the Euro border region, I did empirical survey research also in the three border region of Hungary, Ukraine, and Slovakia. And we identified that the identity belonging to the so-called mother nation, that is for Eastern Slovakians and the Eastern and Western Ukrainians to Hungary, is extremely important for their life. Except that Hungary has never been their motherland, because they were, by the shifting of the border, separated from Hungary, and they never lived in proper Hungary. The best example is from a US anthropologist who made an interview with an old man in a little village in eastern Slovakia, and who told her that well, I was born in Hungary, then I lived in Slovakia, then I lived in Czechoslovakia, then I lived in Soviet Union, then I lived in Hungary a little, and then I lived in, then now I live in Slovakia again. And the anthropologist said, "Oh, you are a migrant person, all right." And the old man said, "No, I never left the village. It was the border who were moving around me all the time, and that doesn't make me a migrant." So the diaspora situation between Hungary and its neighbors is extremely important if you want to understand the migration processes. The more so because the Hungarian very strong diaspora politics achieved that some 10 years ago, the Hungarian state gave double citizenship status to all Hungarians living in the Carpathian region and having ethnic Hungarian background. So, for example, as far as England is concerned, those who are coming from Hungary, a significant proportion of them never lived in Hungary, but they are Hungarians by their passport, but they are from Slovakia or from Ukraine. Don't believe statistics. There is no statistics. Migration statistics is bad already and is doomed to increasing failure because of double citizenship system all over the world and the commuting migration. Full stop.
That was extremely brief. Do our panelists here actually want to comment on that at all? What the Professor said?
I could talk for an hour about the limitations of migration data.
Well, we have 45 minutes left. And that's for the entire panel. And I will actually like to open up the floor in around a half an hour's time. Let's move to current trends in European migration. I mean, we've touched upon it already. I would like to ask maybe our panelists here. Let me just check my notes. We are talking about migration, economic migration. What about return migrations? I know that, Cecilia, you've been, you are interested in this. I have to draw from personal experience. Even though I never lived in Poland before 2004, I am actually half Polish. And the fact that I moved to Poland after it joined the European Union, apart from the head scratching which I got, why am I even there? I also actually heard a comment, so you've come back. Well, I mean, I didn't come back to Poland. my mum came back, but I just moved from the UK to Poland. But it's interesting to see how, let's say, especially in second or third generation families, you still have a feeling again. Where does your heart lie? Where do you feel? Are you do you feel as a member of one country or another, even if you're not in, let's say, your preferred country? And what is a return? Like in that respect.
What is a return? Is this on now? Yeah. I think this is, I can answer the question as well as
we can
as
get
you
philosophical.
Can, you know?
We can get philosophical, and I'd really like our other panelists to chime in as well.
We could get philosophical. I mean, I'm going to start saying something about the things where I feel much more comfortable, which is what do we know about return?
Okay.
So, and we don't know much. It's really difficult. I was just actually very recently trying to deliver something, and someone asked me to write something on return migration in Europe. And because migration data, as was just mentioned, is generally very not good. Immigration data is horrible, and in Europe we just we capture, or national statistical offices capture very little of the migration that's occurring in Europe, because it's temporary or it's short term, it's under 1 year, it's circular. We just don't really know. And the same then happens with return. I mean, you can look at return as those with a certain nationality immigrating into a country. They might actually never have emigrated, and very many people, and I just talked to the many friends who are from one European country and studied elsewhere and worked elsewhere, and I would say more than half of them say, oh yeah, I'm still registered where I live. And because most countries have register-based data, they exist twice, at least, in Europe, in migration data, and they never probably left the country, so they also cannot return, right? We just won't see them. It does seem that there is some, that to some extent that countries like Poland would have reached, correct me if I'm wrong, the Polish experts, or Poland experts, that it kind of reached its emigration potential, and there's not, so some countries have a quite stable stock of migrants outside, it's not increasing, but neither is it really, does it seem return is happening to any large extent.
I wouldn't agree completely with that.
So with Poland, I think people are returning, but it's very hard to put that on paper, right, with concrete numbers.
I'm sure Professor Duszczyk could chime in, because I know that the Polish government at the moment, there has been a website set up for people wanting to return, right, especially with Brexit.
So just one thing on that, because this is something across countries that we see since 2004, especially in Eastern Europe, there's an increase in programs trying to re-attract people. Also in Southern Europe, after the economic crisis, once the economic crisis subsides and they say, oh, actually, we're the people, we need workers, they start to introduce like tax exemptions and, again, for certain skilled groups, and the good ones, usually not for everyone, some countries for everyone, but often for specific groups, and typically, of course, young people, not some old retirees. Sorry, yeah.
Professor Duszczyk, do you have anything?
Yes, sure. It is fascinating question about the return migration. Because as you probably know, in 2007, we decided to establish a special program for returners with different benefits, but also it was the information program. For example, we tried to solve a lot of different problems. For example, if someone decided to emigrate with cat, for example, or with dog, and they, after 3 years spending in the United Kingdom, wanted to come back with the same dog, it was not so easy, for example, because we have to solve a lot of different bureaucratic obstacles. But it was also the special book with the, I think so, 150 pages how to facilitate return migration, but it failed. Because it is not, as country of origin, we don't have a lot of different stimulation tools for people to stimulate their return migration. It is not so easy. Of course, we have some good instruments, especially how how to avoid any different problems, bureaucratic problems. And for example, last week I was also in Kiev, and because it would be absolutely crucial for Ukraine during the process of modernization and reconstruction or modernization of Ukraine after war, how to stimulate migration from such countries as Poland or Germany to Kiev, because without such person, it wouldn't be possible to reconstruct and to rebuild, to modernize Ukraine. And to be honest, we don't have a lot of different good instruments because people are free. We are speaking now about the voluntary migration. If people have interest in UK, and of course they will decide to stay UK. If they want to go to Australia, if it is possible, they go to Australia. If they have interest to come back to Poland, they will come back to Poland. But unfortunately, fortunately, only we try to estimate maybe 15% of people who decided to emigrate after 2004 decided to come back to Poland. It is not successful. It is not successful story for Poland. But it is also quite important to say that we have, if we try to follow the process of integration of people, and that's what you ask about the second and third generation, because we have the process of reception, inclusion, integration, assimilations. And if we have people who are assimilated in the society, in the receiving society, they don't perceive themselves as the migrants, but it is mainly in the third generation, because it's also the cultural aspects. Because if you still live, for example, in UK, but your roots are in Poland, you are, Poles who live in UK. But if you are, for example, if you perceive your roots in UK, you are Brits. Maybe with your grandmother and grandfather in Poland, but you feel like Brits, even if the Brits are not convinced that you are Brits, but still you feel like the Brits. That's why it is quite complicated. That's why we can speak about the return migration maybe in the second generation, during the people are not fully assimilated, but they are integrated in the country or in the receiving country, but still they are not feel as the full member of the society. And the third generation, fourth generation, they are assimilated. That's why we shouldn't speak about the return migration. It is typical type of migration who people decided to change the country, but it is not return migration. Absolutely not. Thank you.
Would you like to?
Yeah, I would like to touch on that. I would like to oppose that idea. Don't trust statistics. Somebody who
I knew that was going to come up sooner or later.
Yeah. Some data is better than no data, right? Poor data is also better than no data. And all data is limited. All data is limited. So we need to do with what we have. And therefore, I think numbers are important. But perspectives or how we look to numbers and how we collect data is essential. That's why I did my 2000 Families project with the design it has. And that is, I went back to Turkey, screened the regions and collected random data. And then from the regions, like origins, trace them over 3 generations. And then you can see who returns, right? Because you trace their movements. And I can say even my data is limited, but I can say, for example, those first generation men and their wives, 70% of them moved back to Turkey. And those who stayed moved back to Turkey when they retired. Their children, only 15% moved, but they moved to Turkey after having the passport of their destination society country. So having that security in case something happens in Turkey, I can move back to Germany again. And in the third generation, there was none. Yeah, they are still young, but they mostly move back when they retire or they take some time off. So what I would like to emphasize is that migration is a fact. We should not fight with migration, right? I mean, at least not among these intellectuals, and try to convince politicians that migration is a process, is a fact. We need to live with it. Perhaps steer it and control it a bit, but just live with it. And migrants have roots, bring benefits because they have roots in different countries, right? You enrich your culture, your knowledge, your
experience,
yes,
yeah.
your remittances, etc. I must also say your crimes. You also increase your crimes. You increase your health or decrease your health. By the way, migrants are healthier. That's another thing. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, there is research on return migration. It does not happen with big numbers, but it does happen, and it I'll keep it here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Professor Leiner.
Thank you. I very much agree with the last point that migration is something very normal, and we need to frame it that way, and maybe linking that to my own research, which is again about borders. Borders have become offered as a solution to some kind of a migration challenge, but in the end, borders are the cause of why we have some challenges with migration. When it comes to data, I dare to disagree a little bit with the poor data. I think poor data leads to poor decisions. Poor data can be misleading. If we make decisions, especially policies based on poor data, we run into challenges, especially in this continent where the rhetoric on migration has become really securitized and politicized recently. The numbers have been misused purposefully towards certain political goals during the last 10 years in particular. Most Europeans grossly overestimate the number of migrants, non-EU migrants, for example, in Europe. And that kinds of data is commonly pushed forward in various rather right-wing political debates in many of the European countries, including Finland, where absolutely misleading statistics are commonly pushed in the media to convey certain image of migration as a threat, as something to be fought against. We are using basically military lingo to depict migration, and before this whole mess started,
like the weaponizing of migrants.
Very much. I mean, that's a good example. Before the war started, Russian war against Ukraine, according to various European polls, migration was ranked as the #1 security threat in Europe. And imagine that. Well, where did that come from? We are an aging continent with the number of states, again, Finland being a very good example, losing population, a lot of people emigrating, no babies being born, people living older and older. Our societies simply cannot survive without migration, and hence we are using a completely opposite rhetoric with very anti-migration sentiments. Let me end up with one factual statistic, and then I'm going to close. 96.4% of global population basically a very, very vast majority. 96.4% of the global population live in the country in which they were born. A very small number of people on this globe are actually migrants. And that's good to keep in mind. Migrants are a very small minority, even at this continent, 5.8% non-EU migration. Of course, within the European Union, it's a different thing, as was said. It's basically a commute if you work a couple of months in another country and move back rather than a migration. But I think that's good to keep in mind, and sometimes to think about why don't we migrate rather than focusing on why people do migrate.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
Yes.
very short. I must correct you. I did not say poor data is good data. I said poor data is better than no data. Yeah, you can make the. Yeah, well, okay.
Ça commence.
You can disagree with that, but I did not say poor data is good data.
Sure, okay. I agree on that, but I still disagree.
Okay. Cecilia.
Just one thing, as you're talking about decision making and data that I felt I wanted to share is, in my experience and my research, politicians don't even need data to make decisions, right? So I have had German bureaucrats telling me to my face today that we took this decision. Actually, no, we had no reason to think it's a problem. There was no data, but we did it anyways. And historical research showing very similar things where it's this, so they want to oppose free movement in historical Germany, and because you would have to give benefits to the foreigner who was Germans from another part of what is today Germany, and they ask for a report back from Hamburg so that they can tell in Berlin that this is a terrible situation with all the immigrants coming, and then they get a report and they're actually really unhappy with the numbers that are reported. This thing suggests there's no problem, so they simply ignore the report and tell their own version of the story instead of the data that was collected in 1860 something. So history repeats itself. So we can be bothered with poor data, but actually for political and poor policy making, it seems to not even matter if there is data or not.
I wanted to stay with you, Cecilia, because you know a little bit about the European Union, let's say in comparison with other policies from around the world. We are talking about voluntary migration. We've kept the conversation really within Europe, what we consider Europe at the moment. But in fact, and I know that Professor Leiner, you also know something about this, that it's not really much to do with Europe at all. I mean, we see global movement, well, we see movement, voluntary movement globally, not just within Europe. Of course, politicians and let's say the populist press love to put Europe at the heart, and that everyone wants to come here and ruin everything. And of course, that goes to we go back to the argument of what is a good migrant and what is a bad migrant, right? But when we look at it, I mean, how does the EU, let's say, compare with other federations or confederations worldwide in terms of migration policy?
So it's quite specific. So your question could relate to external borders as well as internal borders. But what I've studied is free movement regimes. So basically, what we might call internal migration, depending on how we look at it. And my focus has been very much on how it relates to social or welfare policy. And one thing that's striking is that I remember starting this project and saying, okay, I'm going to compare the EU, and then we had the US in the 20th century, and then what was the North German Confederation became the German Empire. And the reasons are that the way that these are constituted politically in terms of political institutions is very similar, and the system of internal migration and the way in which non-discrimination worked and things like this. And people tell me, well, you cannot compare the US to the EU because there's this like American identity that doesn't exist in the same way in the EU. So clearly the politics of internal migration are going to be very different. Like there will be solidarity towards each other or whatever, right? No, it's not different. And one takeaway from me, and you don't even need to compare necessarily so-called federations, you could just compare historically, is like, what level, what are the borders of organizing the distribution of some form of public good? So historically, you have the poor laws. It's the same in England or Germany and elsewhere, and these were the borders of defining the immigrant or the foreigner. So the person who came from the next municipality, whatever was the border of the welfare system at the time. So and as welfare states kind of shifted up to a national level, the relevant border for defining the other in this respect. So there are of course other identity aspects that have to do with language and history and so on. But in terms of the scrounger, it shifts. And the same is comparing then the US and the EU. I was almost surprised. I would have thought there would be a difference for this reason of having existed for a longer time and stronger identity. But the politics of internal migration and granting welfare to the other, the sort of who's also a citizen of the same, what should we call them, entity, federation, is very similar. And of course in the US they have their version of the us and them in terms of ethnicity, in this way that there we have race, having been always a very strong denominator of also who's deserving, who's not deserving. And looking at EU, there are similar things, although they shift depending on who's part of it. So it's interesting now that I'm a Nordic citizen, I'm a Swedish citizen, and when I moved now to Denmark from Germany, I have special, like even though I'm an EU citizen, I'm even better treated than the other EU citizens because I'm a Nordic citizen. And what I wanted to say that is that there are these, there are also ethnic hierarchies, so to speak, within, also within Europe. But again, for me, the striking takeaway is just how you organize the provision of public goods and how important that is for structuring also the politics of migration and defining the other.
Brilliant. Many thanks for that answer. We have 20 minutes left, and I'm very aware that it's getting late in the day. So I'd like to open up the floor to questions. Maybe there is someone who would like to ask our amazing panelists some questions.
Yeah, thank you for your presentations. I have a question to Ais Guveli. Well, if you take in mind the minorities in Germany, then the Turkish minority is the biggest one, but it's also there's some ambivalences with the Turkish minority in Germany. What says also something about the integration, which was not well done in Germany. Just giving you the fact, probably you have heard about that most of those Turkish people, I guess almost 80%, even though those who were born in Germany, their voters sang for Erdogan, though they appreciate to some way the freedom of speech, the freedom of gathering, and all other democratic values in Germany. But at the same time, they don't feel appreciated and not well integrated. And there's some reasons for that. I wanted to ask, are there similar, circumstances in UK or other European countries concerning the Turkish minority, like in Germany?
Yes, that is indeed. Your question relates to on the one hand side to their voting behavior, and on the other side their integration and assimilation. Yes, I mean, if you take the mean, the mean of these 3-4 generation, even now, their labor market participation is, let's say, occupational status is significantly lower than the mean of the native German population, although the children, those who were born in Germany, they're controlling their socioeconomic background, like their parents' education and occupation, they actually do better than the native Germans in terms of education. So although they do better in education, their occupational status do not match, right? And that discrepancy is explained as ethnic penalty, discrimination, and lack of networks, etc. That we can, and this approximately is the same in the Netherlands, France, Belgium, Austria. Little bit different in the UK. And answering your question about voting behavior, I have followed that. In the continental Europe, Turkish origin, or let's say only those who still have their Turkish citizenship can vote, and of those, only 30% voted, and of those, in Germany, about 65–70% voted for Erdogan, right? So we should put all these things in perspective. It's not all Turkish, of all Turkish origin voting 70% for Erdogan. Yeah. In the UK, about 70–80% voted for the opposition to Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. So it has reasons. And those reasons are mostly those living in the UK are refugees from Turkey. So they went because they were against the ruling Erdogan. But we need to look at and they were mostly from the elites in Turkey already, the Kemalists, the leftists, etc. So those who on a continental Europe, these are people mostly coming with the labor migration program, and they were mostly from the rural Turkey, conservatives. And I should remind you that not all of them, or 70% of them, voted. So it's important. And the other thing is, I'm a Dutch, Turkish origin Dutch person living in the UK. My family lives in the Netherlands, and I must say, I should cut it short, but I must say, to even have a bank account in the Netherlands while you left is so difficult, right? Netherlands sees people who are leaving Netherlands, okay, they are gone, they are not Dutch anymore. So the service that Turkish origin people in Europe receiving from Erdogan is enormous. And he's not doing it only because he loves those people. He wants voting, right? He wants their voice. So they, for example, when they move to holidays, when they travel, previously it was horrible. They were like asked money from all these borders, Bulgaria, Serbia, etc. And Erdogan made this very possible for them. So managing and negotiating, saying, no, you can't do this. It is very easy in Turkey to have accounts, houses, and they keep having their interest. So they give them service. That's what I'm saying. Well, at least one of the explanation is this, and the other one is they are conservatives, right? No. Yeah.
It's certainly interesting what you say, and in speaking of voting, I just wanted to maybe just kind of throw out a comment there. How let's say domestic politicians weaponize their respective expat communities to try and make change at home as well. Do we have any other questions from the floor? Yes.
Thank you for the great panel. I have two questions. The first to Professor Leine. I must admit, I did not go into details reading Polish newspapers over the last days, but I had this impression that the situation on the Finnish-Russian border is similar to the one on the Polish-Belarusian, and that therefore there are lots of people coming from, well, delivered by the Russian authorities to the border. And you meant that there were just 3, even none at the moment. So did I understand you right? And then, because that's fascinating to me, if I'm right that this narrative was so different in the newspapers in Poland. Now, a question to Professor Duszczyk also. A week ago, I listened to a speech by Professor Stola, who spoke about the history of migrations in the 20th century, and he meant that most probably the huge migration from Poland in around 2004 is the last migration, which can be understood in a very optimistic way, because that would mean that there will be nothing catastrophic in Polish history in the future. But do you agree that that might be the last big wave from Poland? Thank you.
Professor Leine first, please, if you may.
May I? Yeah. Of course, the situation is quite complex to explain in a couple of minutes. But yes, you understood correctly. Yesterday, the number of migrants at the border were 0. 2 days ago, 2. 3 days ago, 3. That is factual. Certainly, if we think about the whole year, it's around 3,000. Since August, it's just under 1,000. So certainly, we can compare the situation with what's going on with Poland and Belarus, and the fundamental logic behind there is pretty much the same. We are talking about Russian hybrid influencing more than migrants. But the challenge is that in Finland we have this very historical and quite understandable image of a Russian threat, and with that you can sell what kind of idea through the public if you manage to say that this will somehow alleviate that threat. The historical narrative is super strong in Finland. But I've been trying to call for caution in the situation. The border is it's very peaceful at the moment. The border guard is managing it really well. I don't think there's a reason to fuel the flames in the sense and create this panic in Finland. 3 people is not a flood, as our politicians argue, and 2 days ago in the public TV, our Ministry of Interior, representing the True Finn party, argued that we are not looking or concerned about the numbers, but they have information that is secret, cannot be brought to public, that there's a likelihood that this number will increase, and she went on to argue that everybody can go to the internet and Google how many millions of people there are in Africa. End of the argument. So this is the level of discussion that we have. So basically, we should go to and Google how many people there are in Africa, and hence we need to close the border because there were 3 guys there. Certainly. But the point is that we are not talking about these 3 guys, or even 30, or 300, or 3,000. That's not the issue. The challenge is that that Russia is certainly retaliating against our decision, for example, to join NATO. There are other decisions as well, and creating a pressure towards Finland. This is one a card in the deck of cards that Russia is using. I think we are overreacting to the situation because a key point of hybrid influencing is to cause anxiety, cause panic, cause internal divisions in society. And if they can do that by sending a couple of guys at the border, they are doing pretty well. Too easily, I would say. I would have taken a different approach to that. But to answer your question, yes, you understood correctly. The numbers are very small.
Thank you, Professor Dustrik.
If I may comment also to like our Finnish colleagues said, I think so. That's correct me if I'm wrong. I think so. In the last 2 or 3 weeks, it was more than 800 people who came to the border crossings.
Since
August,
900. Since August.
Since August, because you mentioned these numbers. I think so. From the last crossing border points, crossing points where has been opened yet in Finland. This is the very far in the north.
Now they are all closed. Everything is closed.
Yes, I know it. I know it because this is, I think so. Since today is closed, or yesterday, all of the boarding crossings are closed. But I think so. It is a lot of different similarities because this is not voluntary migration. It is part of the hybrid war. Of course, if we speak about the numbers, it is we every day we have more than 100 people who try to cross the Polish-Belarusian border, and we, for example, the pushbacks, we legalize the pushbacks. It is we will have very huge discussion about the pushbacks also with the new government, because, for example, I was published a short article that I think so it is quite impossible for us to abolish pushbacks in the next 1-2 weeks. Maybe in few months it would be possible, but not now, because still we are under pressure of Belarusians, and I think so the previous government not very wise tried to solve these problems only with pushbacks, because if we have these people very close to Polish border, for example, they came from Ivory Coast or from Senegal, it is quite impossible for them to come back to Senegal, to Ivory Coast. They will try and tried, and then maybe in the 10 times they will successfully cross the border, and then it will be transferred by smugglers to Germany or another countries. That's why this is not the solving of the problems. Yes, I think so, but I think that's our Finnish colleagues try to not to do our mistakes with these borders. That's why maybe they decided to close the border crossings. But it's my explanation. Because I was interviewed also by the Finnish newspapers and Finnish TV, and 2 weeks ago I was quite popular in Finland because I said you have to be prepared for different types of instrumentalization of weaponization of migration, because you are the part of the NATO now, and then Russia will try to destabilize not only Finland but also try to check your reaction of this illegal migration phenomenon. But and then this is the questions about the last emigration from Poland. Of course, I tried to find a book because we published a book, I think so, 3 years ago. It was the questions. Is this in 2004? Is this emigration the last, with question mark? But of course, as now we are a typical immigration country. I don't think so that it's possible that, for example, in the next year we will have huge immigration rate from Poland. But of course, this is still open the question. For example, we don't know how it happened with Ukraine. Still, for example, you are a safe country, but still, if Ukraine would lose, it would be another situation. That's why still I think that last emigration question mark is absolutely necessary to put the question mark in this sentence. But of course, for example, I am the principal investigator of the research project on emigration of Polish doctors, because we don't speak about the huge emigration from Poland or all Poles. Poles are different in all part of the societies, but still, for example, we have huge emigration of Polish doctors who decide, for example, to go to the United States. UK is not more attractive for Polish doctors, for example, but they try to find other places like Switzerland, like the United States. because still the work condition in such countries are quite much. The work conditions, employment conditions, are better than in Poland. But for example, during our research, we conducted this research for last 3 years, and in our last phase of this research, the possibility of emigration of Polish doctors dropped about the 20%, because we increased the wages, salaries for doctors. That's why maybe also in the next years, the motivation of emigration of Polish doctors will be much more smaller than today. It is another example that we should be perceived in our part of Europe as typical immigration country, not emigration anymore. But of course, still we have some part of societies, some part of occupations where still the emigration is bigger than in the huge society.
Many thanks for that. I know that Dr. Olszewski had one more question. Oh no, we have one here.
Yes, thank you very much. Very useful observations. It was great to hear that. I have two issues. One for Professor Schick from Hungary, because Viktor Orban has been positioning himself as this harsh leader on migration since 2015. He was the first one to build the fence. But also, I think recently there were some reports that actually Hungary is also, like Poland, as Professor Duszczyk mentioned, is actually having a quite liberal policies as regards, this labor migration. Can you confirm this, and how is this taken by the Hungarian society? What impact can it have? And the second thing is more open issue, but I think it relates to the recent phenomena, after the Russian aggression on Ukraine, there were cases of so-called Russlanddeutsche, so Russian Germans, protesting in the streets, voicing, so to say, their own political views and becoming very vocal, in harsh contrast to the official policies, foreign policies of Germany. Then you have, in the recent weeks, the case of Hamas, Palestinians, Arabs also being very present in the so to say, public space. My question is, because it very much influences the perception of migration, and the perceptions, of course, shape policies. So is this maybe, you as scholars, you might say that this is nothing new, and there were cases like this also in history. But if not, or maybe there were, but would you say that this might be a trend that will be developing, that exactly these different generations of migrants in Europe, but also elsewhere, will sort of, become more active, despite, this, they would not be that silent as those generations in the 1950s and 60s, and how will this play out in the future? Thank you.
We have one more minute, so unfortunately this has to be a quick answer. But first of all, our gentleman online, Professor Schick, I know you look as if you really want to answer that.
Okay,
49, 48.
Okay, the answer is no, it is not liberalism. It is a very strictly controlled, very harsh form of slavery from the Philippines. No, nothing liberal. Was it short?
You can say a couple more words if you'd like.
Are you sure? So if there is anything liberal in contemporary Hungary, it is that the government allowed almost 2,000 smugglers to leave the Hungarian prisons, because they claim that those smugglers are from abroad, and why should the Hungarian taxpayers pay for their staying in the Hungarian prison? So you just let them go. If you call it liberalism, then you're welcome. I don't think it is liberalism.
Okay, I'm really very sorry. We're going to have to wrap it up there. I'm very sorry we couldn't answer all of your questions, but hopefully after the session you will be able to have a conversation with our amazing panelists right here. So I'd like to thank Dr. Bruzelius, Professor Leiner, Professor Schick, Professor Duszczyk, and last but not least, Professor Govelli for joining me here today. My name is John Beecham, and many thanks for joining me for this panel. And a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much.
And we wish you very nice dinner.
Yes, yes,
we
we
wish you
do.
very nice dinner without us, unfortunately.
It's a real shame, but I'm sure we'll manage. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we go to the dinner, I would like to thank the keynote speaker who's not any more with us, Professor Christoph Rast, as well as the wonderful panelists and moderators of both debates. I think, I personally and probably all of us will have a lot of takeaways from those panels, and we will have a lot of thoughts to take back on our way to back home, on the return way, right? To use the word from the debate. Moreover, let me thank the co-organizer and partner, Deutsches Auswandererhaus Bremerhaven, its director Simone Blaszka, as well as Christoph Bongert. The debate could not take place without the financial support of the Bundesinstitut für Kultur und Geschichte des östlichen Europa in Oldenburg and the Polish Ministry of Culture and National Heritage. Many thanks go to the ENRS team that prepared the event. We would also we could also not watch and hear the debate without our interpreters and the team of the event stream. So thank you very much. And well, we will go to the dinner. So we will make a group and go through the museum probably. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you very much.